You just muted all of them.
All right. Great. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I would like to invite all of you, if you want, you can post in the chat if you want to pop in your name and any kind of relevant associations, whether you're here just as a concerned community member or maybe it's work or volunteer related, your interest. So that will just let us know who's in the room with us. And so I'm Ellen Hender, I'm with Vital Communities, and we are hosting this webinar series in our various housing conversations. Water and wastewater infrastructure has been a big topic in the last few years, so wanted to bring some folks together around this. And we're offering a 3-part series. This is the first of that. And we're hoping to kind of share a mix of perspectives, share concrete examples of both kind of successes and challenges, share resources, and hopefully have some good discussion. So we hope there's a little bit of something for everyone. And this first session, we're kind of calling an overview, which really is we're just trying to give a good foundation to build off of as we move into some deeper conversations around municipal solutions and non-municipal solutions. And we have a great slate of speakers today. And so I'm going to go ahead and go over the agenda real quick. So first up, we'll have Andrew Winter, the Executive Director of Twin Pines Housing. Following that, we'll have Jonah Richard, the owner of Village Ventures, Noah Hodgetts, Principal Planner from the New Hampshire Office of Planning and Development, sharing an update on the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. And we have Bruce Douglas from the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. So hopefully this will give us kind of a nice foundation to start with. And we'll have at least 25 minutes for some Q&A time that I am looking forward to. Couple of general reminders before we dive in. Please stay muted during presentation so we can hear our speakers. We're going to save questions for the end. Feel free to pop questions in the chat if you want to not lose track of them, and we'll circle back to them when we get to the Q&A. This had a lot of registrants. We had over 70 folks sign up, so there's a chance we might not get to all of the questions. If that's the case, I'm happy to collect unanswered questions and do our best to follow up on those after the session. And you'll notice it is being recorded, and we will record all of the sessions, but we're not going to post those until after the series is complete. All right, so on that note, I'm going to hand it over to Andrew Winter from Twin Pines Housing.
Great, thanks, Ellen. Great to be here this morning. Again, to sort of reiterate, I'm Andrew Winter, Executive Director at Twin Pines Housing Trust. And if Ellen will proceed to the next slide, I will just give you a little bit of background. We are a nonprofit owner, manager, and developer of affordable housing. We've got nearly 700 units of multifamily housing, primarily in the core communities of the Upper Valley, Lebanon, Hanover, Hartford, Woodstock. But we also are going to talk about a project in New London. And in addition to our multifamily housing, we do development work and bring into a home ownership program additional for sale homes. Those are typically single family or sometimes condo units that are in our portfolio that we provide long-term stewardship to. And then beyond that, we have about 150 to 200 units in various stages of pre-development, including projects in Hartford, Hanover, Woodstock, and in New London. And I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about a couple of them, some of the challenges around water, and then give you my perspective, which is just one developer's perspective on some of the challenges and some of the questions that we get from communities around housing development. There are communities that would like us to do projects that we sometimes push back on around water and sewer. And I'm going to give you kind of an example of why water and sewer is so critically important for housing development. So with that said, on to the first example. On the next slide, which is Mellish Wood. So this is a project, 26 units of senior housing that was developed back in the 1970s by a for-profit developer. It included this historic structure at the front, another historic building next door, and two 1970s era buildings in the back. It's right on Route 4 as you go into Woodstock on Pleasant Street, next to the Shire Motel, if people are familiar with that, and across the street from Max Market, and also adjacent to the Ottaquiche Health Center. So a great location for senior housing. It's walkable, all of that. This property became available following the death of the original developer, and we stepped in to acquire it in 2022. So we've been working over the last 2.5 years putting together a package of financing to redevelop the property. So we're going to be redeveloping the buildings, the historic structures in the front, and then we're going to replace the two buildings in the back with a single new structure that will be an elevator building, 3 stories tall, with a total of 26 units, 28 units. So we're actually increasing the density at this site from the existing 26 units to 39. And that was due in part, no small part, to efforts on the town's part to allow for greater density, some relief around parking. This is a fairly tight site. It's right in the downtown. And so, the town worked very cooperatively with us to do that. So next slide, and I'll touch on water. So water is a big issue in Woodstock. For those of you who've been following along in the newspapers, Woodstock is served by a private water company called the Woodstock Aqueduct Company. It is run by the Billings family of Billings Farm fame, and say that 10 times fast. And the family has run it, and it's obviously serving primarily the core village and the immediate outskirts of the village in Woodstock, running down as far as the high school to the west, and then east along Route 4 around the bend as you come into town. But the system has had its challenges: lack of capital investment, relatively modest size, making it kind of inefficient to run. But then the flooding in 2023 knocked it offline. Here we talked about 10 days. It was actually 2 weeks. And Eric Duffy is going to be talking this more in a future session. But where does that impact us? How does that? Well, now we've owned this building and we're trying to redevelop it. And there's uncertainties around the water system and its capacity. So where this has come up as an issue for us as a developer is in a couple of ways. Although this project is in downtown in a village center, and although it's existing, and you would think, oh, you don't have to deal with Act 250, you must have some exemption. This project did not qualify for that exemption for Act 250 because the town at the time that we were going through the permitting process did not have subdivision bylaws. It had, development regulations, but it did not have subdivision regulations. So we weren't able to bypass Act 250. So we needed a will serve letter. Well, again, this project, for better or for worse, was very much in the center of those conversations between the town, which ultimately made the decision at the end of 2024 to purchase the system, and the Woodstock Aqueduct Company. We were kind of stuck in the middle, which is never a fun place to be when you're a developer and you're trying to move things along. So I would say that the lack of a will serve letter, which is a letter that simply says, we will provide water to you. And even though this property is currently served by water, the fact that we were adding units, even though they're probably going to be more efficient than the existing units they're replacing in terms of low flow fixtures, still, we need that will serve letter. We couldn't complete the Act 250 process without the will serve letter. The good news is the town, as I mentioned, is moving forward with it. We got the will serve letter. We've got our Act 250 materials completed. We're just waiting for the sale of this to go through, because now the biggest issue is pressure. The system, as I mentioned, has some deficiencies. Water pressure at the fire hydrants on Pleasant Street needs to be tested. That can't take place until after the sale goes through. So we are on pins and needles hoping for a sale to go through on or about May 1st. But it shows, like, even where you think you have water, even when you think, okay, this is a good site, it's in sight, it's on existing infrastructure, it highlights the challenges that can arise, in part because of historic underinvestment in many of our communities in the water systems. And again, if I were a taxpayer in Woodstock, I would be happy to have the town taking this over, because I think their access to capital, and Eric, I'm sure we'll talk about this, much lower cost than a private water company. There are low cost grants and loans that they're able to access. So going forward, we expect a good outcome, but it does highlight some of the challenges. So with that said, let's move on to another example of how water can impact a project. This project, Long Meadow Commons, also in the paper. You probably may have read or heard a little bit about this. 60 units of workforce housing on a site directly across the street from New London Hospital, adjacent to the shopping center in on the edge of the downtown in New London. The idea for this project came to us through a local community group that approached us about developing workforce housing, had identified this site, and identified this site in part because there was an adjacent project going on across the street on land currently owned by the hospital to build 200 units of housing for seniors, independent assisted living, and skilled nursing. That project had previously received a commitment for municipal connections. So imagine us coming into town thinking, oh, we're going to be able to get water here. And so because they'd already given this project across the street water. So with that said, we got our site plan approval, we got our financing commitments. But if you'll advance the slide to the next, what we ran into was a situation where we were denied service in the spring of 2023, March of 2023, due to capacity concerns on the part of the local water precinct. New London is served by a by-town water precinct, Springfield and New London. Most of the users are in New London. A small sliver of Springfield is part of the water precinct. And they were concerned, based on a letter that they had received from DES, about whether they were hitting capacity. Not so much year round, but in the summer months. They've got high number of seasonal users, big spike in demand in the summer months when people are watering their lawns and using it for irrigation purposes. And based on that, they denied us service. So we went ahead and we said, well, we've got a bunch of land here. We'll just put a private well in. We went ahead, drilled a well. We actually drilled 5 wells, ultimately hitting enough water on the 5th well. We thought we were golden. We thought we had solved our problem, only to discover that there was contamination. A couple of weeks later, we discovered this contamination from a dry cleaner business on Newport Road, 2,500 feet from the site, and that had already contaminated land across the street where they were thinking about the assisted living and independent living facility, because they had also gone back to the precinct and then ultimately been denied a water connection. So they'd put some wells in, discovered chemicals from the dry cleaning business in that water. So now you've got basically a site where you can't do anything with it in terms of using that water, because you've got funders, lenders, investors who are going to be concerned about, even if there isn't contamination today on that site, what does that contamination look like? Does it migrate in our direction over time? And does that create a problem? So again, we went back to the precinct the precinct denied it. And we are now in front of the Housing Appeals Board in the state of New Hampshire has a Housing Appeals Board, which provides expedited a process for denials of municipal permits and connections. So a decision is expected in the next 30 to 60 days. And because there is active sort of litigation on this, I am somewhat constrained, I will say, in terms of the comments and questions I might be able to make about this, or questions I might be able to answer. But it's definitely given us a lot to think about. So if you'll go to the last slide for my portion of the event, what are the lessons learned? Well, water issues can arise even where they're not obvious. None of what I've been dealing with and we've been dealing with at Twin Pines was necessarily apparent from the get-go. Communities can have service, it can be inadequate. Sometimes that's a reflection of failure to plan for growth. Communities may very well be assuming, okay, I'm used to one home a year coming online, and then suddenly you're coming in with 20 or 30 units, and they're like, wow, that's a lot of units. And so those are all challenges that we definitely saw. Additionally, I wanted to just emphasize that sometimes housing projects are actually a boon to communities because it provides an impetus for upgrading service. Frankly, I would expect that Eric Duffy, when he talks about Woodstock, he may very well, among other things, say that having our project, a real project, a project that would add units in a downtown, was helpful in motivating people to support the municipalization, the municipality purchasing the system. It may be helpful in obtaining grants and other funds. So it can be a benefit. More service, more connections. Therefore, let's invest here. So I've mentioned CDBG funds, community development block grants, is one way to do this. Another is tax increment financing. So for instance, there's a project in Barrie right now that will be moving forward, hopefully in the next year, by one of our peer organizations. That is one where the TIF is providing opportunities to upgrade service to serve a portion of the downtown that doesn't currently have water and sewer, made possible because of the project. Lastly, I just want to kind of take one more minute and talk about developments where there's no municipal water service. Our experience with New London in drilling a system, we've kind of experienced the waterfront, right? We've dealt with the constraints around municipal service, but we've also had to deal with the uncertainties around a private well system and water service. It's an example of just how much money developers need to be willing to put forward before or without the certainty that they're going to find the water that they need in a quality and quantity that they need to do housing. So, as a general matter, developers are going to shy away from sites where there is not existing water and sewer, or at least an easy and obvious way to connect into existing infrastructure because of the uncertainty. So an example elsewhere in the state of Vermont is there's another existing project where they're spending, I believe it's north of $100 per unit per month to treat the water because it has it has a certain mineral in it. I can't remember which one, but it is indicative of kind of like the challenge of private water systems. And imagine you've bought land, imagine you've drilled a well to get water, and all of a sudden you're dealing with the uncertainties around there. So I'm at my time limit. I'm right on time, Ellen. So I'm going to turn it over to you. I know we're going to have opportunities to talk questions, but hopefully this is helpful in giving a little bit of a flavor of at least one developer's perspective on the challenges around infrastructure.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. I think really great to have those examples right here in the Upper Valley. And we're going to move on to Jonah Richard with Village Ventures, another local developer up in the northern edge of the Upper Valley. So Jonah, all you.
Thanks, Ellen. And thanks all for joining. Like Ellen said, my name's Jonah Richard. I'm principal at Village Ventures. We develop small scale projects, primarily Northern Upper Valley, fairly in Bradford on the Vermont side, and a little bit of Orford on the New Hampshire side. So we've been developing for the past 5 years. We have about 60 or so units in the pipeline right now, a mix of affordable workforce and market rate housing. We do mostly uh, residential, but sometimes we, jump into light commercial or retail as needed. So this is a slide of some projects that we have actively or recently completed in Fairleigh. We primarily focus on infill projects, so we do a lot of work in the downtown areas. So Fairleigh has, we're fortunate we have town water. We haven't had to experience some of the problems that Andrew was just talking about. However, we don't have any municipal sewer in Fairleigh. So every single site that we develop, we have to have some sort of private septic system, which if you think of the possibilities on a site, especially a site downtown in an infill environment, it kind of limits you. It really limits you on what you can actually build. So thankfully, we've been able to fit septic systems for a lot of these projects. I want to talk through one of them in a second, which is a little more complicated than our other ones. And then I'll talk about a couple ADU. We also build ADUs, either develop or build for homeowners, and some of the issues that we've run in there. Before I get to the first example, though, so you can see we have, a mix of mostly housing projects here, and we have 512 Main on the right-hand side. This was a formerly vacant gas station that we converted into retail space, finished up last year. And this was an interesting one because it's a third of an acre of a site, and an existing building has an existing septic system. And, we need there's a lot of commercial needs in Fairleigh. If you've ever been up here, we're a small town, 1,000, 1,500 people. There have been in the past a number of vacancies along Main Street that we've been working to fill, redevelop the buildings and fill with good commercial tenants. And we had a couple of really good leads for this building before we got into development. One of them was a bakery, another was a taqueria, but F&B, food and beverage businesses that really wanted to come to the area, either from locals or some across the river, and open up new food concepts. And we were thrilled. This is exactly what we need to help continue rebuilding the downtown area. However, we ran into the issue of the septic. We had everything lined up. We had our capital stack funded. We have had our tenant lined up, and when we started to meet with our septic engineer, designer, and the state, we found out we couldn't fit. No matter what we wanted to do, we couldn't fit a septic system that was sized even for. I think we were looking at 16 seats, like not a big restaurant. This had been a bakery, and we just couldn't do it. And so we had to kind of withdraw from the negotiations with our potential tenants and kind of back into whatever we could fit with the existing septic system, which ultimately became retail space. I'm not saying that's bad, but it really hampered what we wanted to do with the site. And it's a great corner lot. It would have been perfect for F&B. However, we weren't able to do it. So Ellen, if you want to flip to the next slide, I'll go into another example. This is a vacant site that we're working to redevelop currently on Main Street in Fairleigh still, across the street from Chapman's General Store, if you're familiar with the area. It was formerly the old Colby Block, a 2-story mixed-use building with retail on the ground floor and apartments up top. And it burned down 10 to 15 years ago. And, to this day, it's sat as a vacant lot. There have been attempts to redevelop it, but nothing that have materialized. We purchased the site a couple years ago and have since been working through pre-development on potential possibilities to develop this. And we're currently working through design, hoping to break ground next year on construction of this. It'd be a 26-unit building with retail on the ground floor and then 2 stories of residential. However, half an acre, again, it's not a big lot. And if we want to fit 2 buildings that are kind of traditionally built with New England style architecture and have enough parking on site to fit 26, a mix of retail and apartments, there's no more space for a septic system. So we got a little creative. One of our partners owns land across the street. And so we've come up with a plan to bore under Main Street, which is a state road, it's Route 5, through around the town hall, through some private property and out onto this vacant piece of land that's currently vacant and not being used. But the problem we run into is cost. So $100 a linear foot just a core underneath Main Street. We're easily looking at $150,000 system, all said and done, which adds to the needs of the capital stack, right? And if you think of, we don't always have the luxury of being able to use grant funding for our projects. We rely very heavily on bank debt and private capital. It's really hard to translate these building costs into something that's viable financially, both for the banks and the lenders, but also investors, local investors in the area. So it's something we're still working through. There are state funds available to help support this kind of system. But at the moment we're marching forward with this, and hopefully in the future, Fairley's been really proactive in looking at a municipal sewer system. And I think that's one of the comments that just got raised now. However, that takes years. It takes years and years of work and millions of dollars to implement. Not to mention getting the public on board with the bonding the project. So we're still years out from that even being a reality. So for now, we kind of have to figure out alternative ways to fit septics on our projects. All right, I think we'll go to the last slide. So I also mentioned we build and develop ADUs. Some of them are, on our own projects. Some of them are for homeowners. We built 6 of them last year. Of the 6, 3 were on municipal sewer and water, 3 were not. And for all 3 that weren't on town sewer, we needed to put in new septic systems. 2 of them had wells that could handle the additional flow, but for the last one, we had to install a new well as well. And this is a big shocker when you're working with, if anybody here has tried to build an ADU or put one on their own property, as a homeowner, it can be a big shock to realize there's another $25,000 to $40,000 of additional expense just to put another unit of housing next door. And I think it's common to think that ADUs are kind of a cheaper, less expensive way to add density or housing, and they can be. If you have, if you have the right setup on town water and sewer, and you have maybe a space already built above your garage that's semi-insulated and just needs to be finished off, great. Like that's a perfect solution. But many times, at least what we found in our experience, is that's not the case. And the cost of building an ADU ends up being equal to building a standalone house in some examples. We've talked to, we built 6 so far last year. We've talked to probably 10 other homeowners who had expressed interest in doing these, but were, when we kind of shared and opened the books on what potential costs would be, including the additional cost of septic system, it was no longer feasible for them. So I think there's something that can be done here. I'm not a septic designer or engineer, but I do know for all the septic systems we've built over the years, we've monitored usage and actual flow rates. And what we find anecdotally is that the usage of the septic system tends to be half of what Vermont DEC is requiring in terms of design. So standard DEC design is 140 gallons per day per bedroom. However, we often find that we're only using half of that. So I think there could be an opportunity to get a little creative with the requirements for septic systems, especially in areas like Fairleigh where we have it's, you know, all there's no clay, the soils are really good. It's very sandy here. And in doing that, there might be an opportunity to reduce the cost to continue to add density to our homes or ADUs. So I'll pause there and wait for more questions.
Great, thank you, Jonah. And you queued up nicely some of the other speakers we'll have at future sessions, including a septic engineer, and we have Bruce here from Vermont DEC, and we'll have New Hampshire DES joining us in the third session too. So there'll be some good more discussion we can get into around that. So next up we have Noah Hodgetts. So we're kind of shifting gear. We got to hear from a couple developers, hear a mix from small as ADUs to, you know, big multifamily developments. Noah's here to share a little bit about kind of stepping back, bigger picture, the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas. So Noah, I will hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ellen. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining today. My name is Noah Hodgetts. I'm a principal planner in the Office of Planning and Development at the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs. The New Hampshire Zoning Atlas was launched in May 2023 and is a joint project of the St. Anselm College Center for Ethics and Society, which is now the Initiative for Housing Policy and Practice. Sorry, Ellen, previous slide wasn't quite done with that first one. My bad. Yep. So the Zoning Atlas is a joint partnership of St. Anselm College Center for Ethics and Society, which is now housed out of the Initiative for Housing Policy and Practice, and then my office, the New Hampshire Department of Business and Economic Affairs, as well as the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. Next slide. So for those not familiar with either the New Hampshire or Vermont zoning atlases or the National Zoning Atlas, the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas, or NHZA, is a collaborative project to research, catalog, digitize, and graphically display all the New Hampshire's zoning regulations specific to housing, community by community, district by district. What you're seeing in this slide on the left is a screenshot of what the Zoning Atlas interactive map looks like. On the right is what the raw data would look like of how all the different districts are coded for all the different 100+ variables related to housing, everything from height requirements to minimum lot sizes, lot coverage, so on. Next slide, please. So just a couple of basics, and hopefully there's not too much feedback on the line. We collected data initially from over 23,000 pages of zoning, subdivision, and site plan review ordinances and regulations from all 234 municipalities in New Hampshire, as well as the 10 village districts that have zoning authority, and then the 25 unincorporated places. And we initially did this as of June 1st, 2022. We then did an update for June 1st, 2023 and June 1st, 2024. And we're right now in the process of updating our base zoning atlas data for the next update as of June 1st, 2025. As I said, the atlas has data for 269 different jurisdictions, which is a total of 2,152 different unique zoning districts throughout the state of New Hampshire. It categorizes everything from residential to non-residential, as we'll see on some of the maps in a minute, and then looks at a lot of different housing types and uses, everything from 1 to 5+ family, workforce housing, ADUs, and manufactured housing. As I said a second ago, it includes data on everything from minimum lot sizes to setbacks to lot coverage, as well as parking requirements. And you can find all of the zoning atlas data and access the interactive map at nhzoningatlas.org with the link shown at the bottom of the slide. Next slide, please. So the first map we're seeing here is the existing zoning atlas data for the New Hampshire communities and the vital communities service area. And primary residential zoning districts are shown in yellow. The mixed use districts are shown in orange on this map, and non-residential districts are shown in purple. Non-buildable areas, including water bodies, wetlands, protected open spaces, and roads are shown in gray in this map. Next slide. Oops, sorry, I think I screwed up the cursor there. My bad. So this map is showing you what we will be releasing later this summer. This is a sneak peek. We'll be adding this first map showing in buffered water lines of 300 feet, shown in blue on this map, and we'll be doing this for the entire state. Next slide, please. And so same thing here. This map is showing the buffered sewer lines, again, 300 feet, shown in that kind of green color. Next slide, please. So now when you put the two together, users will be able to toggle between the water line layer in blue and the sewer line layer in green, and turn the layers on and off individually, or have them both on to show either or both on the map. Next slide, please. So now we're going to zoom in to see how this data really affects the underlying zoning. We'll zoom in on a couple of communities of the towns of Enfield and Hanover and the city of Lebanon. Next slide, please. So this map is showing the existing zoning atlas data for Hanover, Lebanon, and Pittsfield, which is currently available on the NH Zoning Atlas interactive map, again, at nhzoningatlas.org. Again, as I said earlier, the primary residential districts are shown in yellow, the mixed-use districts are shown in orange, the non-residential districts are shown in purple or maroon, and the non-buildable areas are shown in gray. Next slide, please. So this map is kind of taking those earlier kind of macro views of the entire vital communities service area on the New Hampshire side of the river, and overlaying the water line buffer over parts of Hanover, Lebanon, and Enfield. So again, this is showing the water lines in blue, buffered by 300 feet. And the waterline buffer is based on data provided by the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, DES. DES actually, a year and a half ago now, undertook a significant update of their waterline GIS layer for the whole state, and collected updated waterline GIS data from all public and community water systems throughout the state. So we have really good kind of current updated data for water lines. As we'll talk about in a minute, it's been more of an effort to update that data for sewer lines. And the one thing I also want to point out on this slide before we move on is that the waterline buffer is clipped so as not to cross interstate highways or large rivers and water bodies. So for example, you'll see, as folks know, 89 kind of bisects kind of good chunk of Lebanon. So we've clipped, for example, the water lines to not extend across 89. Next slide, please. So now we're showing a similar doing a similar map exercise for the sewer line buffer, which is shown in green, again, buffered by 300 feet. This data, the sewer line buffer data, is based on data collected by the New Hampshire Zoning Atlas team, provided by municipalities, regional planning commissions, as well as in some cases digitized from static paper map images, which our GIS consultant, Rick Lederer Barnes, who I think is actually on today's webinar and is doing the bulk of the work, and who I want to give a shout out to for putting together the slides for this webinar, Two has had the glorious task of heads up digitizing many of the old paper maps for some of these smaller communities that do not have historically not had digital GIS shape files of their sewer lines. We also, in some cases, had to extrapolate lines from older DIS sewer area buffers where no other data was provided. And again, as I said, for the water line buffer, the buffer is clipped so as not to cross interstate highways or large rivers and water bodies. Next slide, please. So now when you put the two together, in order to determine serviced area parcels that intersect the 300-foot water line and sewer line buffers, in order to create this kind of service area parcels, we undertook kind of a multi-step GIS analysis where we clipped the serviced area parcels with the covered by the 300-foot water line and sewer line buffers. We clipped those buffers to a 1/4 or a quarter of a mile utility line buffer. Again, clipped partially to not extend over the highways and large rivers and water bodies. And the resulting serviced area, therefore, is all areas within the 300-foot water sewer buffers in the area of any parcel that touches the 300-foot buffer, extending out to a 1/4 of a mile or 1/4 of a mile from the service line within those parcels. We did this based on talking to several developers about what was really kind of financially realistic, as we heard from kind of Andrew and Jonah earlier in the presentation about kind of financial challenges of kind of developing water and sewer. Again, what we heard from talking to developers is when you go beyond extending a line, water sewer line beyond a 1/4 of a mile, it really becomes cost prohibitive. In some cases, maybe less than a 1/4 of a mile. But so we settled on a 1/4 of a mile into each of those parcels with that 300-foot buffer. Hopefully that's clear. If there's any questions, I'm happy to put those in the chat. And I may even pick on our trusty GIS analyst, Rick Barnes, who's in the audience. And so together, we felt like this provides a reasonable area for larger development that could connect to existing utilities. Next slide, please. So now we'll hone in on how the actual numbers of buildable area based on different lot sizes changed when we added in the water and sewer data. So the table on the left illustrates the minimum lot sizes as coded in the zoning atlas currently for single family homes. The atlas takes the midpoint in allowed minimum lot size, I should say, for districts that have variable densities based on the presence of water and or sewer, and in some cases, soils. For example, if a code states that the minimum lot size is a 1/2 acre with water and sewer, and 2 acres without either water or sewer, the atlas we've currently coded the density, the allowed kind of minimum lot size for that in that district as allowing a 1.25 acre minimum lot size. This can lead to some areas showing higher densities than is actually allowed, given an absence of infrastructure, and also show lower allowed densities than is allowed when infrastructure is present, because by virtue of simply taking that midpoint. Next slide, please. So now here we're seeing when we apply the actual allowed lot sizes based on the presence or absence of water and sewer infrastructure to the map. And again, this is just for single family minimum lot sizes. The calculated areas of buildable area changes. So under the new approach, we see that the area of smallest possible lot sizes increases, shown in dark brown, and in the areas in dark brown and red. Again, not surprisingly, kind of for those that know, this is, let's see, the West Lebanon area. This is kind of downtown Lebanon, where you'd have to have the smallest lot sizes. This is Enfield and Village of Enfield along Route 4. And then this is kind of downtown Hanover up here. So those areas with the smaller lot sizes increase. And in the areas with over 2 acre zoning shown in light yellow, more in the kind of far out areas, also increased due to some of these districts having variable density zoning and a lack of existing infrastructure. For these three municipalities, available land area, ignoring existing development that is zoned for small lot, single family, less than an acre and less than 200 feet of frontage is 12.2% with the current zoning atlas. With the current zoning atlas data before we've adjusted for these variable densities due to the presence of water and sewer. Once we've added in the water and sewer layer, we can now see that the area available zoned for small lot, single family, again, minimum lot size of less than an acre with frontage of less than 200 or fewer feet, shrinks from 12.12% of buildable area to 8.9% of buildable area. So again, now putting those two together, for those that are having trouble, next slide, please. I'm sorry, Ellen. For those that are having trouble kind of comparing how those numbers compare, you can now see the kind of side by side in the two maps and the two tables here. Next slide. So we did a similar exercise. This is just showing you again for 5+ family structures. Minimum lot size again, somewhat of a similar kind of trend emerges. Not going to go through. So again, you're seeing the buildable area again here. This is just the existing zoning atlas data before we've adjusted for the variable densities for water and sewer. Again, just taking the midpoint of with and without services. Next slide, please. So again, when we apply the actual allowed minimum lot sizes based on the presence or absence of water and sewer infrastructure, the map and calculated areas, again, shrinks. Under a new approach, we see that the area with the smallest lot sizes, or some of the smallest lot sizes of 1/4 of an acre to 1/2 an acre, shown in dark orange. So let me say, I don't have a cursor, but these areas, again, primarily in the downtown areas and town centers of Enfield, Lebanon, and Hanover, as well as the areas with 1.5 to 2 acre zoning, in this kind of regular, more mid-colored orange. Those areas increases while the areas with lot sizes of 1 to 1.5 acres shown in the slightly different shade of orange actually decreases. And then again, areas over 2 acres with zoning over 2 acres remains unchanged in this case for the 5+ family structures. Because even though there's water and sewer variable, the underlying zoning does not have variable density for those districts. And in fact, the light yellow areas in Enfield here shown in the R3 district in Enfield have a minimum lot size of 15 acres. Next slide, please. So I think this is my last slide. I think I apologize for going a little long. Again, here is just showing the two maps and the two tables side by side again. We hope to release the full kind of statewide water sewer layer later this summer, or hopefully late spring, early summer. We haven't quite come out with the target release date yet, but please, we'll certainly kind of put that information out to everybody. We'll also be updating, as I said at the beginning, the zoning atlas data to be current as of June 1st, 2025. And for additional details, check out nhzoningatlas.org.
Thank you, Noah, and you're right on time, so you're doing great. Yeah, I'm really glad we're able to include this. I know kind of looking at numbers and maps can maybe feel a little overwhelming at times, but I think it's a helpful tool as we think about, where there really is infrastructure to add some density, so that we're not just sprawling out our development. And just wanted to note too that we have the Vermont Zoning Atlas as well, which kind of I think was unveiled last fall. I was poking around it earlier, and I don't think they're doing anything exactly like this with the water sewer overlay, but still helpful tool to see. So now I'm going to hand it over to Bruce with the Vermont Department of Environmental Conservation. We've heard from some developers. We got this kind of high level looking at where water and sewer exists and where development can probably most easily happen. And when it comes time to actually do building, we have to follow the regulations that are there. And so, Bruce, I'm going to hand it over to you to share about the Vermont side of this.
Great. Thank you, Ellen. And I really want to thank Vital Communities for setting up this series of workshops. I think it's very, very useful. So secondly, a quick overview. Where I come from is I'm currently in the public sector, but that's only been a third of my career, my over 40-year career, and 2/3 of it been spent in the private sector, working as a consultant to individuals and municipalities around the country on water infrastructure issues. Next slide, please. So the programs that water programs in Vermont I want to talk about today are 4 regulatory programs. One, the statewide wastewater system and potable water supply program, which has universal jurisdiction since 2007 over municipal water and sewer connections, soil-based wastewater systems, otherwise known as septic systems, and non-public water systems. And non-public water systems are differentiated from public as being typically less than 25 users or roughly 10 connections, and greater than 60 days per year. There's some very specific definitions, but very high level. So we do the small water systems. We also do indirect discharges, which I'll talk about in a minute, have a scale of greater than 6,500 gallons per day, which is somewhere in the order of 25 or so single-family houses. I mentioned the public water supply program, so that's an entire separate regulatory program, and that is regulated originally under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but Vermont has primacy and runs the program at the state level. And also in our water supply program is the online geographic database of water wells. So since the droughts of the mid-1960s, beginning in the late 1960s, we've been collecting data, locations, yield, stratigraphy from well drillers and licensing well drillers. So we have a significant, we have tens of thousands of wells located on the Agency of Natural Resources Atlas online, available online. And it's very helpful information. Just recognize that we're relying upon the drillers to give us the location. So sometimes you might find a well that's in the middle of the woods, just with a number, a longitude got slightly misinterpreted or miswritten. But it's really helpful. Now, next slide, please. So what we have is a regional office program for small scale systems. So this wastewater systems and potable water supplies, commonly called the WW permit for wastewater and water. And we are Environmental Protection Rule Chapter 1. We've been around since the early 1970s, and we have 5 regional offices, the map on the right. And we didn't have jurisdiction over all systems until 2007, and that was that when the legislature gave us that, they also put some strings on it. They said you shall have a technical advisory committee that the governor appoints that has professionals in the field that can make sure DEC, Agency of Natural Department of Environmental Conservation, which is part of the Agency of Natural Resources, has is in tune with the technology and practices in the field. And also, we've licensed designers. We've been doing that since the 80s. So it can be engineers or civil environmental engineers or non-engineers who are trained and licensed to design wastewater systems and potable water systems. We set the technical standards. Another string that the legislature made sure we had to have a strong, innovative, alternative technology program, and that had been available even back in the 80s, but strengthened in the 90s, but it really got full force in the mid 2000s, and nationally, a lot of technologies are out there that can help enable development on lots that might not have been developable under the previous regulations. We have a high volume program, the highest volume program at the Agency of Natural Resources. We issue almost 3,000 permits a year. We've been doing that steadily for the last 3 years. And we issue 95% of the small projects within 30 days and the larger projects within 45 days of getting a permit application. So I guess one thing I want to point out though is while I'm talking about this scale, and all our permits are available online. So there's about over 100,000 records are available online, searching by address or date, town, and name. And you can, and it's really helpful if someone's looking to buy land or buy a developed parcel. It doesn't have undeveloped land, but has parcels that are permitted by the state. See if there is a state permit on that property and what the criteria and conditions are associated with that permit. Also, just in general, I think I just like to say that Jonah's anecdotal 50% actual flows is accurate on average. But the real issue is, just using the bridge analogy, you can't design a bridge for the average weight of the vehicle going over it. You need to design it for its capacity and have a sufficient safety factor to deal with peak demand. So I think our number of 70 gallons per day per person is reasonable and well supported in the literature and by data that we've seen. A big part is our permits run with the land. They don't run out. So if you have a state WW permit, it goes as long as, for that use for that piece of property, no matter who owns it. And so that's why another reason why we want to design for the full capacity of that property. People are entitled to, if they have a 3-bedroom house, to have 6 people in it. That's what the design flows are based on, 2 people per bedroom. Next slide, please. Real quick, indirect discharges. So what an indirect discharge is when you are not discharging directly into a stream. A direct discharge is a wastewater treatment plant that cleans up the water and then discharges it into surface waters, whereas indirect discharge goes to the soils and groundwater, then to surface water. And basically, the soils provide treatment media, and the groundwater also provides attenuation, dilution, and a time for pathogen die-off before reaching the surface water. Next slide, please. So these larger indirect discharge systems serve ski areas, developments, mobile home parks, schools, towns, villages, and campgrounds. Next, please. But one thing, and this is an issue that came up with Andrew and Jonah pointing out, is the villages, the importance of the existing land use patterns, in Vermont and in New Hampshire, as well as looking at NOAA's images there. You can see the villages, and so essentially the state of Vermont has really prioritized helping villages do feasibility studies. There's been well over a dozen since 2002 that have been completed. There's this 2008 publication that you can see on my slide. It was basically a handbook for Vermont communities to look at village wastewater systems, wastewater alternatives. And so we were fortunate to get significant American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA funding. So they're about 30 million. And for a water supply that's gone to the town of Killington, is putting a new water supply to address PFAS contamination issues on their existing private water supplies. And I list 5 here, but there's almost 10 communities that have been working on wastewater initiatives, and these 5 are the ones most likely to be going forward and for construction. Essentially, Vermont has put in the last, let's say, in the 5-year period beginning in 2021 to 2026, we'll have put in the same amount of investment in water wastewater infrastructure as they did in the prior 50 years. So there's been significant input, and it's, I think someone mentioned that it may have been Jonah. you also, not only do you need the money, you need the village support for these initiatives, and that's really important, and often a public relations challenge. Next slide, please. So we've got a lot going on. I'll kind of quickly summarize. The American Rescue Plan Act is putting in $26 million into manufactured housing communities, totaling 66 parks, over 3,000 lots and units, and they're also the state of Vermont has a manufactured housing unit task team. There's a goal of 100 new energy efficient manufactured homes going in by the end of 2025, and they've already put in a number of those units already. Essentially they're let's see, I think they've sold 9, they've sold 6, 9 under contract. They've installed a total of 34 energy efficient manufactured homes in 5 manufactured housing communities, and they're looking at 25 manufactured housing communities, and to get up to the 100 by the end of the year. It's really a priority of the administration. And relative to on-site systems, ARPA again, we put in over $15 million into American Rescue Plan Act for individual water and wastewater, a total of over 600 awards given, over 500 households served, combination of water and wastewater, some water only, some wastewater only. And that just really had a significant impact. That was a low impact. A lot of these are low impact, programs, low income programs which had, income caps. So only people who qualified could get the funding. Thank you very much. That's my presentation. I look forward to questions.
Great, thank you, Bruce. I wanted to just add that on the New Hampshire side, the kind of counterpart, the DEC is the New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, and they'll be joining our 3rd session on May 7th. I put their website here, and they have, a directory where you can find the right division or person to contact with specifics there, but they will be joining us in a couple weeks. So we're gonna move on to our Q&A time. Again, just thank you to our presenters. I feel like we fit a lot in the past hour, and I hope everyone is taking something away. And I'm going to stop screen sharing here, and if folks want to join us on screen, you're welcome to turn your cameras on, not required. And I think there were a couple questions that came up in the chat. Otherwise, if folks want to use the raise hand function, or if you're on screen, you can just physically raise your hand. I'll keep an eye out for that. If your question's directed to like a specific person, you can note that, but otherwise happy to have our various people chime in. And I know we have folks who have knowledge here in the audience too, so I'm happy for this to be a bit of a discussion rather than just a simple Q&A. Maybe we'll jump to the questions in the chat to start. I know there are a couple about Fairleigh, so this might go more towards you, Jonah. But so there's a question around if Fairleigh had considered doing a feasibility study for a public sewer system. And a secondary question of, does Fairleigh allow or consider community or multifamily septic, or have they considered it? I don't know if you think.
I think they're working on a feasibility study. I'm not really sure where they are at the process. I'm not involved, but I'd imagine they are. If they're, if they're serious about investigating this, I think that's the first step. As far as community septic, I've heard, the town's talked about that. I think the problem you end up running into is finding a site. You still need land. Fairleigh's kind of this weird geography where we're sandwiched between the Connecticut River and this like big set of palisades, and like we can't really expand east or west, so it kind of just runs north and south. So finding land that's undeveloped that someone's willing to contribute to community septic system, I think is difficult.
We'll have Sarah Marchant from the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund and Rock, New Hampshire joining us the non-municipal session, and she'll be talking about some of the kind of shared septic stuff, especially that manufactured home parks use. But yeah, you do need land. Any other?
Well, if I
Someone
could
chime in?
maybe quickly follow up on that. They show, I mean, it's a good point. There's two things. There's municipal water opportunities that if villages don't have water. The challenge is we have so many small villages, and it's hard for them to have the technical, financial, and managerial capacity to meet the requirements of the Safe Drinking Water Act. But regarding wastewater, I mean, that is, I think Jonah really pointed on it, is finding, the locations and also the willing landowners. And so it's been a challenge. But communities have found this takes perseverance and just looking further and further afield. It typically in scaling the project to what's available are issues that have to be considered. One town had a great site, and then suddenly the landowner pulled out at the last minute, and they had to shift and find another site to address it, or not serve. One village didn't get served; it just didn't have the capacity because there wasn't land nearby. But it's definitely worth exploring and doing the feasibility study, looking at knowing what your options are and what the cost of those options would be.
If you don't mind me checking in, this I asked the question about the community septic. Northwood, where I'm on, have been on the planning board for a long time. We are primarily well-based, but the eastern part of town has a slightly higher density. We also had an issue with MTBE contamination at one of our major intersections, which really spawned the whole idea of a community water district, which primarily came about through our conservation commission. They were looking to protect land. Some of our backland were probably like Fairleigh. We have the Crossway Route 4. Most of that land that they had eyed was already hydric soil or well saturated. So they combined the two to protect that. They just expanded it with another 120 acres. And now half of our town has community well available. They have the capacity to serve that, and it was a combination of some landowners worked under the CONSCOM, some donated their own lands. We also bought some. We have not addressed community septic yet, but that is a successful model for community well, at least for some of our rural towns, of getting the backland
Robert,
available. Sorry, go ahead.
So your audio is a little scratchy, and I just wanted, could you say which town was that?
Northwood, New Hampshire.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Just thoughts.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you. For Noah, there's the question of, Canaan wasn't included. I think
I could speak to this actually.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is a good one. So, and I don't know, and we're going to pull the slides back up, but if folks look at the slide, you'll see that all of Canaan, which for those that are not familiar, it's kind of that fourth little kind of square in the upper right quadrant of Lebanon, or Hanover, Lebanon, Enfield, and then Canaan. Canaan, unlike Lebanon, Enfield, and Hanover, is one of the 18 communities in New Hampshire that does not have zoning authority. So our zoning atlas map shows all of the community. Thank you, Ellen. In orange, so it's right. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but there you go. Right? Nope. Thank you. Nope, over there, up one. Yep. So that's
Got it.
Enfield, and then right up here is, I don't think you can see my cursor. I think you're at Enfield still. Yep, there you go. That was that
Up here.
orange one,
Orange.
I
Got it.
believe is, I think that's,
Oh yeah,
I
next
got
to
my map.
Hanover.
Yep, that's Canaan. Yep. So you see it's all orange, mixed with residential because they don't have zoning. So yes, if you were to zoom in on this map, you can't quite make out the green areas with the sewer. You can certainly see some little blobs of blue, but because they don't have zoning, they don't have minimum lot sizes, and they don't, and then do not have minimum lot sizes that would vary as a result of having presence of water and sewer or lack thereof. So hopefully that answers the question.
One question I had, I know Paul, you're on the call, so I might put you on the spot a little bit. Paul's with Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust and helps manage the VHIP program on the Vermont side, which has helped fund some ADU projects. And I really have appreciated hearing from Jonah just about, the additional cost that having to deal with sewer or water when doing an ADU can add, and how that could be a real challenge. And Paul, I was just curious, I know those VHIP funds have added a significant amount of ADUs. Have you seen projects, not move forward because of that as a barrier, or I don't know, just any observations from your end on that?
Well, actually, we did have some, there are definitely hindrances, financially when it comes to, if people are actually adding a unit, so sometimes you have to get creative, if there's infill type development, like as Bruce was saying earlier about the number of bedrooms is what matters. So sometimes if people are actually taking a bedroom out to create the ADU, then they, as long as their septic system is in good enough shape, then they can usually move forward pretty, quickly. But it's when people are adding the units, and if they have to size it, and then if they have to come up with a whole new system, they have to get the engineer in, and they have to do all these other things. And sometimes they get the engineer in and do the work, and then find out it's too expensive. So now they know they have. So I'm glad to hear that the permit stays forever. So that's nice, because once they have a permit, but if they can't do it then, because sometimes that happens though, and it becomes cost prohibitive at that point, because you're also trying to build a new unit too, which is, a cost also.
Yeah.
And
Thanks, Paul.
so it does kind of create a bit of a hindrance in some cases. Yeah. We had
then
some money
Andrew-
though there is some, what I understand, there's still some money available through the Agency of Natural Resources,
Okay.
Healthy Homes Initiative grant that individuals, I believe, can get anyway.
Okay, cool. Andrew, I was wondering, I really like the two examples you used. I think one, feels very promising, the other challenging, but wondering if you can speak to, just I don't know if you have specifics or can share specific numbers in terms of the additional cost just when you run into these roadblocks, but I feel like that's helpful to understand if these projects aren't inexpensive to begin with, but when you hit these kind of snags, like what impact does that have on the total cost of a project?
Yeah, sure. Again, I will, let me just talk a little bit about Woodstock. So I talked about 6 to 8 months. Think about where we were economically 6 to 8 months ago. Think about where we are today. Long-term interest rates are trending up. And we've also got tariffs. And that is definitely having an impact on the confidence of contractors to sign contracts to move projects forward. So, it is, developers do not like uncertainty. We like to lock in a price and move forward with a contractor, and move forward with construction, confident that we're going to be able to build a project for the money that we have available. So we're in a situation where we're obviously very worried about costs and how it all shows up and how it plays out on a project like that. still to be determined. I'll go back to New London and kind of talk maybe a little bit about some concrete examples. So, imagine you design a project assuming that you're going to be able to tap into a domestic potable water supply from the municipality. All of a sudden, you have to pivot, design a system where you're using the existing water infrastructure for sprinklers, but you've got to have a separate system with all of its regulatory requirements for potable water through a private water system. That expense, somewhere between, for 60-unit project, somewhere between $250,000, $400,000 in additional costs. So by the time we were drilling wells, adding infrastructure to bring the water up, building supplies, because typically, I don't know, Bruce, if you're doing this, but typically the state of New Hampshire is looking for backup redundancy, so that you have in your private water system storage equal to several days worth of water, expected water usage. So it can be quite expensive. Maybe you had to put a road in so that you could bring equipment in and in anticipation of this. So the costs are not insignificant. And now, we're sort of in the worst of all worlds, because we've spent a bunch of money over here on a well system or exploring a well system. Now we're pivoting back to, and seeking a municipal connection. And again, we're sort of ping-ponging back and forth between the two systems. We would not be where we are today, which is to have a path forward, were it not for a foundation that had made a significant contribution to assisting us with a lot of this work. Other developers may very well have simply walked away and said, there's too much uncertainty, not going to do it. When you guys figure it out, we'll be back. But we have stuck with it, and we'll continue to stick with it for the foreseeable future.
Any other questions coming up for folks? I feel like I could probably come up with questions for the rest of our time, but I don't need to be the only one talking. No, I wonder, we can also wrap a little early if there aren't other questions, but I do want to throw one more out. With the water sewer overlay with the New Hampshire zoning atlas, I feel like it's been kind of, it was mentioned at the gathering at St. Anselm's last fall. And so it's kind of been talked about a little bit as it's been in production, and just wondering what, what you're hearing from communities about the value of it, or from developers, just kind of what's been the overall tone of that.
Well, I think if I'm understanding your question, Ellen, is kind of like, what is the tone, and kind of what are people hearing from communities, and kind of interest in this?
Yeah.
I think people are generally excited. I think, and I guess there's kind of there's two veins. I can't say I have heard from communities that are not as interested in being on the forefront of permitting new housing. I'm sure we will hear from those people. But I think communities, especially like some on the call tonight, and I know some of them that are even went through in New Hampshire, the Invest New Hampshire Housing Opportunity Planning Grant Program, the HOP grant program, and made a lot of good regulatory changes. We're really excited about having this data to be able to show, okay, we've made the zoning changes to support increased density and do more infill development. Now we're going to have this great data set to be able to say, okay, some of these small towns we weren't able to show to developers, where water and sewer even existed. And so just the virtue of just putting those two things together, for some of these small communities, especially those that are really interested in doing more housing, even some of the smaller, even, thinking of Jonah, of all the projects you highlighted in Vermont, I think is going to be really powerful for some, especially these smaller communities in New Hampshire. Hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Paul, jump in.
Hey, I'll ask one. I'm just curious, there's about lot size, and how to, in different types of septic systems. I mean, because so if, I know that the lot size has changed, and so if you have a house that, is built on a quarter of an acre, or, and then you need a new system, right? Or if you wanted to develop that property into multiple levels, and so you need to upgrade that system, like what other kinds of, are there any other kinds of options available, like, pre-septic regurgitators, or things like that? Like what other kind of things are available, and what can people do other than just say, I can't do it,
Bruce, is that one you can speak to at all?
Sure, I'll even unmute myself to speak. So there's two things, just to make sure people are aware. And in Vermont, if you're fixing a failed system or replacing an existing system without changing the use of your building, that typically doesn't trigger it triggers a permit, but we are allowed to have variances. So basically, there's flexibility in the rule. Make do with what you have and get the best system that you can. So that's part one. And part two is when I mentioned innovative alternative technologies, is their goal is really it's twofold. Is one, to pre-treat the wastewater so the system can be smaller, and also pre-treat the wastewater so you can have decrease your separation to the seasonal high water table, which is your treatment, your natural soil treatment zone. So that and then we have a number of systems now that combine treatment and disposal. There's bottomless sand filters that are actually, you might see little rectangular structures in the backyard, essentially a mound without the gentle slopes, and that's a way to treat and disperse at the same time. And the private sector, on our website, you see that there are now dispersal and treatment technologies out there to save having to have a mechanical treatment unit or a filter unit in your yard separate before the disposal, the leach field. Instead, combine these specialized design leach fields can combine those two things, and I think that's likely to have a cost benefit. And really, it's very site specific, though. You can't say everything's got to be how far away are you pumping, and what are your soils like, to really know what's the best alternative. So that's where the licensed designers need to get involved and say that on your particular property, this is the alternatives you have available to you. But excellent question, Paul.
Excellent answer too. Thank you.
All right, I think we have time for maybe like one more question if there's anything else on anyone's mind. And if not, if folks have any follow-up thoughts or questions that come to you later, please feel free to reach out. I'll put my email chat. I'm always happy to connect with people. Otherwise, I just again want to thank our speakers. Appreciate the knowledge and expertise that you're able to bring to us, and remind folks that there are 2 more sessions of the series. So the next 2 Wednesdays at the same time, that's April 30th and May 7th. Next week, we'll be focused on municipal solutions. We have Eric Duffy from Woodstock, which was mentioned, as well as some folks from Jaffrey and Peterborough who have a joint project that they did. And Ben Frost, previously of New Hampshire Housing, currently with Rhode Island Housing, and some other folks. And then the final session will be on those kind of non-municipal solutions. And so I hope you'll join us again. Yeah, so just be in touch if you have any questions, and otherwise I'll see you maybe next week. Thank you.